growing.
Do you know that I have a podcast?
I have heard of your podcast. Yes,
Okay,
I
so
did know that.
I have a podcast with Matt Levine. It's called Money Stuff. And we talked about this. The fact that you could see 24/7, 24/5 trading has also been a topic of conversation. But you think about how the market works right now, where trading is concentrated. It's the open and the close. Even though it's open for several hours throughout the day, you really have that concentration at the open and the close. And I mean, if we entered into this situation where the market never shut, I think I called it like goblin hours, where you'd have just this funky overnight trading, and where would the liquidity go? I mean, would you still see those concentrations of liquidity, or what would that even look like?
So this is exactly the type of questions that the New York Stock Exchange and other exchange operators are asking their own clients, because they're not going to build an offering if there isn't demand for it. And Katie, you bring up liquidity. If there is many shoppers, I like to kind of use that anecdote, that are all concentrated in a certain parameter, you're going to get better price improvement. You're going to get a better quality of your shopping experience. So that's why you're seeing kind of a rush at either the open or the close for certain stocks. And so if you spread that out, it could impact, just because of the spread of liquidity and who's shopping when, it could impact pricing. So that is why right now, when you look at 24/5 trading in some of these apps, it's mostly retail investors. It's not as if you're seeing a hedge fund making big bets overnight, because quite frankly, they're not going to get the best pricing for that.
But could we see that? Could we see the situation where you do have these goblin hours of trading, where it's a bunch of retail traders trading off hours, but then you have hedge funds and other types of professional players coming in and basically trying to make a buck?
I think that the answer to that question lies in the resources that firms put into, for example, maybe expanding their people and their presence overseas. If you need someone to be up, right? And it doesn't really make sense to employ traders and have them make trades at 4 a.m. if they're based in the US. However, if you open up an office in Asia or in Europe, you might be able to make those trades and provide those services. And same thing for the banks. Like you need to actually invest to expand and build out the infrastructure to support the growth of this market. And we're seeing that. We're seeing firms that are, this is new for Robinhood, for example, to offer 24/5 trading. And they had to invest in it and make sure that they have a partner, Blue Ocean, that is the ATS, the alternative trading system that they're sending the orders to. So this is all things they have to build out the infrastructure, and they wouldn't do that if they didn't have clients that were asking for it.
When the clients who are asking for it, what do we know about these clients?
So a lot of them are retail investors, and I believe that the stocks that they are trading, there's similarities
I believe they call them
to
stonks.
meme stocks. So you see all of the headlines that you're reading about AMC and GameStop. Those are the types of shares that are going to be trading overnight as well. There's a lot of crossover.
I wonder what it means for like the CFO of a publicly traded company, who can say, okay, well, it's 4 o'clock on a Friday. I can go home and not worry about the company's stock price until Monday morning, maybe 4 a.m., but most likely 9:30.
So there are parameters that are set in these overnight trading where there's, it depends on the platform, but I believe for Robinhood, it's 20% that the shares cannot rise 20% more than the current or below. It's just to have some safety nets. And some are even tighter, like 5%. So you're going to prevent wild price swings overnight. And the pricing is not going to be as immediate in terms of, or compared to what you would see in the normal day hours.
I have to say, I find this conversation a bit depressing.
Why?
Like, I just
because
feel
you like it when the market's closed. And
She
I
likes her
do.
weekends.
I like having a weekend, and it feels like just the evolution of everything, but including markets, is increasingly we're always on. And I feel like in some ways, we've seen financial markets take a page out of, dare I say it, the crypto markets.
Yeah, that's what I always think of when I talk 24-hour trading, because it's like,
and think about currencies.
Bitcoin never stops trading.
Never.
Currencies also trade FX. Like there's other markets that do operate in this way, and it doesn't mean, Katie, that you're having to stay in the studio overnight or come in on the weekend. So I really do think that this is just firms are going to adapt, including news firms. But it is true that you walk out on the streets and you might get a news alert on your phone or on your watch, and you're going to react to that. And investors, they might be able to like express their own investment decision in a tighter or different time frame than what was previously available.
And this is sort of a philosophical, hypothetical sort of situation, but you think about how companies and how the government releases news right now. They do it outside of market hours for a reason, so that markets don't go crazy. You think about the 8:30 a.m. Data releases. You think about when companies come out with earnings or big material changes.
Or really bad news.
Exactly. If markets are always
8 p.m.
on
a Friday,
putting it out, 5, 6, 7, 8 p.m. on a Friday, maybe it changes corporate behavior as well. Of course, those are sort of unanswerable questions right now.
Right. And again, you can't, the wild swings that you might see in normal day hours, you would not see that overnight because there are parameters in place to prevent that from happening.
In reporting out this story, did you speak to anyone who laid out worst case scenario for you that actually you thought to yourself, okay, this could be not so good for financial markets?
I think the worst case scenario is that, again, it's all about investments to expand the infrastructure of the market. And the firms that are going to lose out are the ones that don't have the same resources as the bigger firms that can adapt. So you might see a bifurcation. You might see the biggest banks and the biggest market makers get even bigger and stronger because they have the resources to capture this momentum, whereas the smaller players that just can't compete because they don't have the same amount of resources, that might become harder and harder. And so what does that do to competition? To be determined.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a very preliminary conversation, even though it feels like we've been talking about it for a while. And to the point that, you would think some of the professionals would want this, the exchanges, the market makers, if there's more trading, they would theoretically make more money. Is anyone campaigning against this, so to speak? Is there anyone who vocally does not want this to happen? Besides me.
So there is an application with the SEC. 24 Exchange is trying to be a registered stock exchange, and it would be the first to offer 24/7 or 24/5, whatever it ends up being. But it would be the first regulated venue. So Gary Gensler has said that the SEC is reviewing this application. He's said he's not against it because he's actually for anything that is pro innovation, pro competition in the marketplace, which this is. It's a new venue, but they need to answer a lot of questions. SIFMA put out their own comment letter basically saying, hey, SEC, you really need to answer all of these different parameters and think through the implications that this, if you approved it, this new venue would have on the marketplace as a whole. And so I think that it's still going to be a long haul, and the questions, and there are many, need to be answered for that application to go through and for this to continue to grow. If we see a registered exchange, that might mean that the biggest stock exchanges like NASDAQ and NYSE have to follow and offer 24/7 or 24/5 trading. So all of these things are going to play out in the next months, years to come, and we'll see if it affects our jobs.
I was going to say, Katie, you got to file something to the SEC that says you're concerned for financial journalists.
I'll submit a comment letter or something. Yeah.
Hey, again, it's among the most read stories on the Bloomberg Terminal today. It's today's big take. Kat Doherty is Bloomberg News finance reporter. Check out her story and more on the Bloomberg Terminal. Well, let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 Newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. The Supreme Court has extended the delay in the Washington criminal case against Donald Trump on charges he plotted to overturn his 2020 presidential election loss, all but ending prospects that he could be tried before the November election. In a historic ruling, the justices said for the first time, former presidents can be shielded from prosecution for at least some of what they do in the Oval Office. The justices have ordered lower courts now to figure out how to apply the decision to Trump's case rather than do it themselves. Howard Krent is a professor of law at Chicago-Kent College of Law. He talked with Bloomberg Intelligence about guidance for what the lower courts are supposed to do next.
The court's opinion is more detailed than we expected, and so the district court will have to thumb through and sort of get clues and hints. And the court did give a couple of examples in the opinion about what it considered to be worthy of absolute immunity and what it didn't.
Professor Howard Krent at Chicago Kent College of Law on Bloomberg Intelligence. Forecasters are watching Hurricane Beryl in the Caribbean. It is the earliest Category 4 hurricane on record. It formed farther east than any other Atlantic hurricane in June. Beryl grew to a Cat 4 on Sunday morning, and it is expected to cross the Yucatan Peninsula by the end of this week. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
What about artificial intelligence? Is artificial intelligence going to enable you and others to say, we have enough information to know exactly what something is going to be worth in terms of insuring it or not?
Artificial intelligence is finding its way into our business in a variety of different factors. I think the first piece is getting much better insight into data, which allows us to make better decisions on underwriting. It's also a great opportunity to service business better in terms of like call centers and different ways of what's using robotics and other AI will be very helpful. But it is an emerging practice within the industry and one that is evolving very quickly. So it's also going to present risks that other companies, how they use it and how they use large language models and making sure the decision making is very sound. So it's complicated, but it definitely is benefiting the business today.
Jobs Day, and Bloomberg has the report under surveillance.
The job market is quite strong. There's no major job losses. The economy is still chugging along.
This Friday, Bloomberg will bring you crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed.
We have a labor market that is not inflationary.
Perhaps some cooling is in front of us.
We're now starting to move into the more normal stage. There's a lot of things under the hood here.
The June Jobs Report, Friday on Bloomberg.
Well, I think what's happening is we're starting to bring realism into the discussion. I mean, I think understanding the global energy system, the scale of that system, the important role that it plays in everybody's life around the world, and then thinking something that's been built over 150 years, trillions and trillions of dollars of investments that's playing such a critical role in the economies around the world, how you transition out of that system. And I would say transition from a higher carbon emission system to a lower carbon emission system. We started out with a very narrow solution set focused on wind and solar and EVs, and assumed or aspired that that would address the total set of the issues, and it doesn't. We need to be more realistic around, to Patrick's point, there are a lot of solutions that are going to be required. We should stay focused on the problem statement, which is emissions and reducing those emissions, and less focused on exactly how to achieve that, and let every company, every sector, all technologies compete for the most cost-efficient way to reduce those emissions, and we will make progress much faster, which will mean making today's system more emissions efficient while we introduce new systems that have lower emissions. And then with time, you will transition and we'll make progress.
The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
You need to have an AI game plan. We used to say that every company needs to think about becoming a software company. Now we say that every company needs to become an intelligent software company.
Context changes everything. Power, money, culture. Haslinda Aman tells the story of Asia's rise through the people who are helping to shape it. This week, with the drive of winning over a new generation of fans and players, Live Golf CEO Greg Norman is shaking up the game.
The best players in the world, on the best golf courses in the world, in the best cities in the world, it's very easy to get that multiplying factor to move out.
Latitude, encore presentation this weekend, only on Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. Yes, NASDAQ 100 index all advancing. Russell 2000, though, in the red, down 0.8%. Here's where we stand. S&P up 8 now, 54.69, up 0.2%. The Dow up 27, up by about 0.1%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 113, up 0.6%. The world's biggest bond market getting hit as traders weigh some of the potential implications of the November election after last week's presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. 10-year 4.47%, but the 2-year right now 4.77%. Spot gold little changed, up just under 0.1%, 23.28 an ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.3%, 83.39 for a barrel of WTI. The popular stocks influencer Keith Gill, better known as Roaring Kitty, is being sued for allegedly orchestrating a so-called pump and dump scheme involving GameStop shares. Gill, you recall, rose to fame promoting GameStop during the 2021 meme stock craze. He reemerged in May and again began posting about the games retailer on X, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter. GameStop today down by 4.5%. Again, recapping, S&P up 9, up 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Charlie. Certainly do appreciate it. I do want to stick with Boeing because a lot happening with Boeing. Shares higher by about 2.3%. 6 months after a fuselage blowout threw Boeing into crisis, the full weight of the legal and financial fallout from the near catastrophic accident is bearing down on the company. The Justice Department plans to charge Boeing with criminal fraud after finding that the company violated a 2021 deferred prosecution agreement tied to previous fatal crashes. That's what Bloomberg News reported late Sunday. And then just hours later, Boeing announced a plan to buy back Spirit AeroSystems. Remember, this was a supplier that had spun off 2 decades ago. It's going to buy that for $4.7 billion. This a bid to improve manufacturing. We got with us George Ferguson, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Aerospace, Defense, and Airlines Analyst. He joins us from Bloomberg Intelligence headquarters in New Jersey. George, I want to start with the U.S. Justice Department news that we got late yesterday. The plane maker is supposed to choose between pleading guilty or taking the risk of actually going to trial. This, according to people familiar with the matter cited in the Bloomberg News story yesterday. What are the implications for Boeing here?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if they decide they want to go to trial and fight this, I think the company does run the risk of being declared a felon. I guess I'm not a legal expert, so I understand companies can be convicted of felonies, I guess, and then that could make it difficult for them to get government contracts. And then you do run.
So that's what I wanted to talk about here, because the government is a big customer of Boeing, and we talked a lot about this in the past with you. What's the complication here of the customer going after the company that they purchased from, and sort of I know you're not a lawyer or a legal expert here, but this gets really messy really quickly.
Yeah, and so I'll say again, I'm not a legal analyst, but from my financial industry analyst hat, having that on, I would say it gets even more complicated than you might expect, because there are products they build for the U.S. government that I don't think anyone else could step into short term and supply. And I'll give you one, like the KC-46 tanker. They've had a lot of problems with it, a lot of cost overruns on it, but they supply that tanker to the U.S. military because the existing tanker fleet is 50 plus years old, and we need to rejuvenate that fleet. If the government decided they wouldn't buy any more from Boeing, Airbus could step in and provide a tanker, but it would take years and years. And then you run this, sort of second, sort of tier effect of, are you putting the company out of business? I mean, this is one of your most important defense contractors. So I think they reserve the right not to be able to give them any defense contracts, but I practically have a hard time seeing that happening.
And is that really the reason why the stock is up over 2% today? It's interesting, again, the contrast between the headline, which sounds very bad, and then you take a look at what the stock is actually doing. And this is a great day for the stock, and it hasn't had a lot of great days recently. And I mean, it just feels like at the end of the day, I mean, Boeing is an incumbent by a long shot here, a large margin.
It is, right? And look, it's not like there's no other defense contractors. There are, and there are other commercial aircraft manufacturers. But I would say the reason Boeing, I think shareholders are excited today is because it looks like some of the challenges to getting to a better place are starting to get fixed. And I would say, first of all, I don't think we've heard from Boeing on whether or not they're willing to accept this offer from DOJ. But generally, the offer that I saw, which included, someone that's going to come in and provide some more oversight, and included a fine, which I think brings the fine total to $500 million, and then would keep them out of a situation where they would have this felony against the company. That whole, again, not being a legal analyst, but that whole package appeared to be something that would be very manageable for Boeing to go ahead and accept. Now, I don't know all the interior details of that. So that doesn't look bad. It looks maybe better than we might have expected. And then at the same time, they announced that purchase of Spirit Aerosystems last night. It looks like Airbus would cart away the stuff that they need to make their airplanes and get paid some $500 million. We knew that was a loss-making business, but that clears up the major hurdle for Boeing to bring in Spirit, and bringing Spirit into the fold, I think, is the path to higher build rates and higher quality on the money-making 737. And Boeing really needs a really good second half to this year. They burned $4 billion of cash in the first quarter. They told us to expect similar numbers in the second quarter, and we've seen deliveries lower than they were in first quarter. So we could even see a worse cash burn in 2Q. They need to turn that around. We don't think they're going to get positive for the year, but they need to turn that around because they can't keep burning $4 billion a quarter and not run out of money sooner or later.
Hey,
So
George.
it seems like they're starting to set things up.
George, with the Spirit deal, and especially that part going to Airbus, does that mean that Spirit will no longer have to sell, or Boeing will no longer sell to Airbus as a result of the way this transaction's working? Does Boeing not become a supplier for Airbus because Spirit was?
Exactly. This would peel away the Airbus pieces so that Boeing isn't responsible to deliver anything to Airbus so they can make aircraft.
Okay. So are there any other parts of Boeing's supply chain that you see moving forward that could get folded into Boeing?
Look, I think there's always a potential in it. So prior to the buy of Spirit, we saw Spirit buying in pieces of the supply chain. So obviously going forward, if you had these problems in the supply chain, and a lot of this is strategic buys where the supplier is breaking down financially, can't meet its commitments for quality or something, and they're going in and being absorbed into the company. So I think going forward, that means Boeing could do some smaller absorptions like that, purchases like that. I don't see any large size purchases by Boeing, anything this size, they'd have to pull in to fix supply chain.
And I want to talk a little bit about what this Spirit Aerosystem being bought by Boeing, what this means for the fundamentals of both companies, because we did get a headline from Moody's, for example, saying that ratings of Spirit Aerosystems on review for an upgrade. You take a look at the fact that this is all stock, and you have some people out on the street saying that this could help Boeing really hold off from a downgrade. And you think about the state of Boeing's financials right now, how important, George, just in about a minute, is that investment grade rating to Boeing?
Well, I think it's critical in case they have to get back into the bond markets and raise more money, and there's probably a decent probability that they might need to do that. And so I think Spirit not going to bring anything to the profit line for at least the first year or so. I mean, sort of 20. Well, this deal's not going to get consummated until 2025, so maybe they could bring a little bit, but not a big contribution to profit from Spirit. a little bit of contribution to revenue. I think the rating agency is still sort of looking through near-term challenges to better days.
Hey, George, we just have 10 seconds left, but what's one more thing that you're watching between now and the end of the year for Boeing's health?
Labor. Boeing's biggest labor union's coming to the table in September. They're getting a strike vote authorization as kind of near as I can read what that is in July. That's going to be a rough discussion.
Okay, we'll certainly have you back on before now and then to chat about that and everything at Boeing. That's George Ferguson from Bloomberg Intelligence. He's Senior Aerospace Defense and Airlines Analyst joining us from New Jersey. Coming up next, they make the stages for Taylor Swift and they could be valued at more than $1 billion. It's one more thing. This is Bloomberg.
Liquidity is the lifeblood of an airline. We make very conservative decision making about when we raise funding and how we raise funding. We try to diversify our sources, and we're always very focused on the actual rates. And we like to build in flexibility in these financing structures so that we have an opportunity to prepay debt when appropriate so that we can continue to optimize the overarching rates that we're paying.
What have you learned with the dynamic move of the interest rates that we've seen from Chairman Powell? I mean, do you go fixed structure or floating structure, much more like what they do in Europe?
Yes and yes. We have a mix currently. It's a little bit of a different model than what I was used to in the public company space. Say in some ways we provide ourselves with a natural hedge, leaving some of our debt floating and some fixed.
You have to have the short-term discipline to sort of circle the wagons around cash. I mean, cash is oxygen. I know where every ounce of cash is going, but we also have to be nimble around that as well because things change by the day. I know the folks who aren't willing to invest right now may have large pockets of investment in the future. So I want to be in front of them. They may not be a buyer at this point, but I do want to spend a lot of time in front of that other set that is a buyer at this point. They're interested. They want to be an early adopter of the stock. They're interested in the story.
DOJ or other authorities
could face bigger challenges next.
Fed was going to keep rates World Cup. This is a 3
as the economic picture.
Covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
Now, your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It is 2:53 on Wall Street. Coinbase Global says the U.S. Marshal Service has selected it to provide custody and advanced trading services for seized digital assets held by the agency. The agency is responsible for asset forfeitures and has handled billions in cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin over the years. Coinbase now higher by 5.6%. NVIDIA shares are back in the green, up 0.4%. French antitrust regulators are preparing to charge NVIDIA over alleged anti-competitive practices. This according to Reuters, citing sources. Tesla is expected to report another quarter of weaker sales tomorrow, and it's running out of alibis. Analysts are estimating that the car maker will report that it handed over 441,000 EVs in the second quarter. That is a 5.4% drop from a year ago, and it would be the second consecutive quarterly decline. Tesla shares right now, they're up 6.9%. Sources tell Bloomberg Teva Pharmaceutical Industries is being investigated by the FTC over patents for certain drugs, including asthma inhalers. A source says the agency is seeking information about contested patents that may have been improperly used to block competition for asthma as well as COPD treatments. Teva shares are trading little change right now. We've got Teva up by about 0.7%. And Chewy shares now trading lower after an initial move higher after Keith Gill, also known as Roaring Kitty, disclosed a 6.6% passive stake in the online pet food and product retailer. Chewy down 5.1%. Those are our top company stories.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg